So let's start. How are you?
Okay. I'm doing great. And how about yourself?
First of all, thank you for being here. It's very nice to see someone with your experience to talk about something that is kind of mind-blowing to people. So it would be very interesting to have you here and to learn more from your experience. So if you would love to tell us about what you do.
So yeah, coming to my background, so I work as the senior manager for genetic counseling department, and I have been associated with Circle DNA for past 6.5 years. And I have done my master's in human genetics, and I have over a experience of 12 years. And mainly, I deal with clinical cases. So I deal with inherited cancers or family planning, for example, what we actually cover in Circle DNA. And then I also look into other categories as well, which is something to do with pharmacogenomics, where based on the genetics, like what kind of drugs will work more effectively for you. So all of these things are something that I've been dealing in and out throughout my career, and this is where I have my passion towards.
So let's talk a bit about the science behind it. So I'm no one with any science biology background, and I have no idea what's DNA. Can you break down this complex topic so that anyone will understand?
Sure. So DNA is like the fundamental unit of life, because DNA is something that is hereditary material, which is present in humans and also many other organisms, right? And each cell of DNA, it consists of two strands of, coiled into a double helix structure, right? If you look at it in the Google images, you'll see it's in a double helical structure. It's like a staircase that you can see is in a helical structure. And, these, very specific DNA, right? It has nucleotides in them, and it is made up of main three components. So, for example, there is a phosphate group, and then there is a sugar molecule, and then there is something called as nitrogenous bases. Now, nitrogenous bases are basically, they are further divided into four components. For example, there is something called as adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine.
I think a big part of the DNA and the genetics is whatever happened before in my parents or grandparents from diseases like chronic diseases, diabetes, and so on, will most likely be inherited by me and the next generations. How accurate is that? And how do I know whether there's a high probability of me getting diabetes if my parents got it?
See, the thing is, there is something called as, inheritance patterns, right? So what it basically means is like, there are some conditions which are following a certain pattern of inheritance. For example, as I said, cancer earlier. So they follow an inheritance pattern, which is called as autosomal dominant, which means if an individual has a mutation, then there is a 50% chance for the child to actually carry it or not. But when it comes to, family planning, there it follows an inheritance pattern, which is called as autosomal recessive, which means, an individual needs to carry a mutation and the partner also needs to carry a mutation. Only then, the child can have a 25% chance for being affected, by the condition. So this is how it varies. And when it comes to diabetes, it follows a complex mode of inheritance, which means, there could be a possibility that it can be inherited from the parents or it might not be, but it could be due to many different genes altogether. So it's a combination. So that's why it's called polygenic, mode of inheritance.
Let's say that both parents do have diabetes or some kind of chronic disease, and there is a high probability or a high percentage that this might be inherited. Is there anything that I can do from my side to minimize the risk of getting the diabetes?
Definitely. So that's a great question, because that's the whole point of doing this genetic test. Because if you are able to know like what kind of genetic risk that you have for certain conditions, the best part is, all of these conditions are highly preventable. So, which means you can take certain actions in terms of your diet, your lifestyle, and also you can be more proactive by doing the necessary screenings. And this way you can, literally avoid this condition to be diagnosed at a later stage of your life. So when it comes to diabetes, definitely if you know that there is a genetic risk, then it can be pretty much avoided by making the changes as early as possible. So that's the reason why many people, when they get to know about these results, let's say in their 20s, the changes that they make from then onwards can definitely avoid them to make it, more easier to mitigate the risk in future. So that's the idea behind it. And for each condition, right, like say for type 2 diabetes, 40 to 50% can be due to the genetics. Like genetics is something that is going to influence it. But the remaining 50% is your diet, lifestyle, and other factors. So your environment plays a major role as well. So yeah.
Like after I posted the video and it went viral, I started to get a lot of questions, basically the same question. People had this feeling that just from my saliva you can tell all of this. Is it really accurate? It would be transported to another country. Is really the results reliable?
Basic science behind this is that every single cell of our body has DNA in it, as I said earlier, right? Let it be your hair, or let it be your saliva, or let it be your blood, or like even other bodily fluids, right? So the easiest method for us to collect the DNA is through the swab, which is your saliva, right? So this is just a cotton swab. You take it and then you just rub it inside your inner cheeks, and then boom, your DNA is being collected, and then you put it in the container, which basically has those necessary ingredients to store the DNA for a longer period of time. And this way, you basically ship it to our lab. It comes to a lab, we extract the DNA, right? Now this extraction of DNA is where we ensure that all the essential element that is needed from the DNA part is something that we take it, and then we run it into a machine which is known as next generation sequencing machine. So this is where they analyze every single specific sequence of your DNA, and this is where we try and understand if there is any mutations present or not, or what kind of different changes that you tend to have, or what you have inherited, right? And that is where this information is individually analyzed, so that you get the necessary information for you to make the changes that can help you in your lifelong journey of well-being, right? So that's the whole idea. And it is of course authentic. It is of course the very fundamental reason why it is being done is to basically give that charge to people to take that information and make necessary changes to make sure that they live more healthy, right? So that's the idea.
I would love to move to the next part, which is my results. So when I saw the reports, it was mind-blowing. There are some points that I look at and I would say that makes a lot of sense. I should have known this before. And to be honest, there are some points that made me kind of freak out. I'm going to be very open now. So recently, for example, I've been under a lot of stress. I have been managing a lot of projects, and I started to forget things. Like I would be looking at my laptop and I was like, this thing, and I would forget the word laptop. And a couple of seconds later, I would remember and I would say laptop. And then I noticed in my report, I'm just going to open the report now so that we can go through it. There was a section in the report talking about the possibility of getting Alzheimer, and I think I was at high risk, and it.
I think your result says moderate risk. Yeah.
Or moderate risk, and it kind of freaked me out. Like, okay, maybe that's related.
No, definitely. I will explain to you in detail. No need to freak out, and that's the reason why we are here, right? So that's right. So no need to worry. Certainly I will help you understand what it means and what you can do about it, and how it's going to be important for you to know the different aspects on how to mitigate the risk, right? So I'll be going through that. So in dementia and brain health, we are actually screening for known common genetic mutations which are associated or linked with conditions like Alzheimer's disease, bipolar disorder. We also screen for dementias as well as Parkinson's disease and also schizophrenia. So from our analysis, we found that you tend to have a single copy of a genetic mutation in this specific gene, which is called as APOE, and this gene is highly associated and correlated with Alzheimer's disease. So here, what you need to understand is that having this mutation doesn't necessarily mean that you will get the condition for sure, but it means your likelihood is much higher than the general population. So this information is very valuable in itself, because you can do certain follow certain recommendations, and there are certain different suggestions that can help you to mitigate or reduce the risk so that you don't get this condition in future. And here, as you can see in your report, your risk is moderate because you only have one copy of the mutation. But let's say if somebody has two copies of the mutation, their risk can go to elevated, which is even more higher risk. So there is something called as lifetime risk, and this is something which is known to be pretty much default for people based on the mutation that they carry. So if there is a general population, so by general population I mean people who do not have a family history of Alzheimer's and people who do not carry the mutation in this gene, they have an risk, which is average risk, which is approximately 10%, right? So that is the lifetime risk. But in your case, because you have one copy of the mutation, your risk can go up to 33%. You see, so that is the reason why you have to be a little bit more cautious compared to somebody else. Now, if somebody has two copies of the mutation, their risk can go up to 48 to 50%. So that's how high it is, right? So that is the reason why you can definitely use this information to your own good. And in terms of the underlying science behind this condition, right? So as you might be aware, Alzheimer's is one of the most common conditions which affects globally, and people might have issues with memory loss, and their cognitive efficiency can get lower over the time. And this is a very late onset of Alzheimer's condition that we are screening for, which means this condition usually gets pretty much diagnosed, or you can say the symptoms start appearing after the age of 55 or 60. So considering your age, right? So you have all these years to actually work on yourself, and then you can reduce the risk till the age of 55 and 60.
Actions, or what should I do from my side in order to minimize the risk?
So this is something that I'm going to suggest you based on the scientific studies and evidences that have been, actually published, right? So here, as I said already, the risk is a little bit higher than the general population, nearly 33% for you. In terms of the recommendations, so number one thing would be regular exercise. Now, why? Because there was a very long-term study which was done by the Alzheimer's Research and Prevention Foundation, and they have seen that people who do regular exercise, at least 150 to 180 minutes per week, which will basically come down to 35 minutes per day for 5 days in a week. If you can do that, you can definitely reduce your risk for Alzheimer's up to 50%, 50. So that's a huge chunk of percentage. That can be straight away reduced by just being physically active or being physically fit, right? Now, this doesn't have to be anything very intense. It can even be brisk walking. It can be even like some amount of moderate cardio. So whatever works out for you, you can engage in it, and this can definitely help you to reduce the risk. So this is something you have to be very consistent about, right? So that's number one. Number two is mental stimulation. So as you might be aware that in Alzheimer's, the brain cells tend to deteriorate. Your brain, nerve cell endings will also start to, die, right? That is again as the age progresses, and this is a very normal, natural process. But in Alzheimer's, the rate at which it happens is much faster compared to a general person, and that is the reason why it's different, right? Now here, mental stimulation is very important, especially in your case, because if you start engaging in different brain teasing games or activities, right, what it does is it will help you to form new nerve cell endings, and that way it can help you to stay more active, and your memory efficiency will be much better, and long term it will help you to reduce the risk. And this is a very interesting study which was done by the NIH Active, which is the National Institute of Health, and they have seen that people who even did 10 sessions of mental training, they not only improve their cognitive functioning, but they're also showing long-lasting impact even for 10 years further. Right, so this is the impact of it. So if you can, engage yourself maybe in things like Sudoku, or like board games like Scrabble, or like even there are certain apps out there which can be focusing on these elements. For example, there's one app that I can suggest. It's called Elevate. ELEVATE. So this is something, if we can use it at least 10 to 15 minutes every day, it definitely will show a long-term impact in how your risk for Alzheimer's can be reduced. So that's number two. Number three would be your sleep duration and your quality of sleep. Now, this is very important, mainly because there was a clear indication that was seen that people who had lower sleep duration, they tend to have this harmful protein in their brain, which was being formed at a much faster rate, which is basically beta amyloid and tau, TAU. So these are two harmful proteins which are constantly being formed in the brain, and that can be reduced, or you can say that can be flushed out of the brain by having at least an average of 7 hours of sleep duration. So that is something, if you can look into, that will be great. And technically that can also reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease, right? So that's one of the things. And the next one would be your diet, which is very important, of course, because everything that we eat has a very significant impact on our overall health. And Alzheimer's is also called as diabetes of the brain, and that is because the sugar intake that we have, or let's say the excessive carbohydrate intake also that we have, if it is not being broken down properly, or let's say if it is too much in excess, then it can cause a spike in your blood sugar levels, and this ultimately can cause inflammation of your brain, and which indeed can cause Alzheimer's disease. So that's why in your case you have to control or cut down on your sugar intake. Of course, once in a while is fine, but it should be technically on the lower side, right? So that's something you have to be careful. On top of that, you have to ensure that there is a good intake of omega-3 fatty acids. Now, omega-3 fatty acids are known to be very beneficial in reducing these harmful, chemicals, or the so-called, protein being formed in the brain, and you can have the sources of it from nuts. So if you can have every day handful of nuts, that will be great. It could be a blend of multiple things like almonds, pistachio, Brazil nuts, flax seeds, or chia seeds. All of them are great. And also you can consider, for example, fish intake. So if you're someone who can consume fish, so twice in a week would be great. And if not, you can even consider omega-3 supplements as well.
That's very beneficial because, to be honest, since I saw the report, until this moment, when you started to explain things, I felt like, okay, it's inevitable. It's going to happen anyway, and that's it.
Yeah.
But now I feel like empowered. Like I feel there's
exactly,
a lot.
right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's very powerful.
Of course, there's a lot of affirmation on the fact that it can be definitely reduced, the risk, and you can totally avoid getting it also. So that's the whole idea, because these are very known, well researched steps that will help you to cut down the risk. So
Yeah, the idea is that a lot of the suffering that people might go through is preventable.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's the core point, actually, what you spoke about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very good, and it's very helpful, and I'm really thankful for the recommendations that you gave me. Now I feel kind of empowered.
Relieved.
Yeah, and relieved, of course. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, that's
great. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Have a
Okay.
wonderful day. Thank you.
You too. Okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.